Again, let me join, let me say thanks to Andrea and Ian and everyone else for this occasion, but of course, a really massive thanks to Robert, who's given us an excuse to come together. Robert, I mean, I think you should add this to your book of energizers. You know, it takes 42 years to write all these articles, but then look at the energy it produces by getting people together. And such a far cry from my first faculty retreat when I came to IDS 15 years ago, and in the faculty retreat, Robert said at the end, let's have an energizer, and everybody ran for the door. I did join IDS 15 years ago to work as a newly recruited fellow in participatory methods. I'd met Robert many years before in Delhi in the Ford Foundation in 1984, where he was famous for never giving a grant out as a Ford Foundation fellow. I visited IDS at his invitation then as a visiting fellow in 1989, but the worlds of PRA and PLA were new to me because my background was in working on poverty issues in the North and in the United States, drawn from different traditions. So given this, just after I arrived, I was very excited when Robert asked me to join him for a workshop with the Swiss Development Corporation, who had just then agreed to support the growing work at IDS on participation, and who were paying me my work points. So we traveled together to an old castle, now a hotel, nestled on the side of a Swiss mountain. That was the first time that I saw Robert in action. By the end of the event, the castle walls were covered with newsprint. 8 bureaucrats, at first a bit stiff, were on their hands and knees drawing pictures and sorted colored cards. And in the grand finale, the Director General, who had come to give a speech and to take questions from workshop participants, was persuaded, following Robert's example, to lie on his back on the floor, dressed in his suit and tie, and to listen to several dozen assembled staff from this repose rather than speak from the podium. It was an encounter I'll never forget. And the story still circulates as legend amongst some within the SDC. The last time, I think, their Director General lay on the floor to listen to the staff. It wasn't only a participatory event, it was a transformative event for many of those involved. Over the years, I've seen many similar events. But what I've come to understand and to respect, and want to spend my now 4 minutes on, is behind the workshop techniques are highly sophisticated ideas about not only participation, but about power. I had oftentimes PRA and PLA as critiqued for failing to ignore power relations. In preparing the chapter for this book, I had the wonderful opportunity to go back and reread with the help of some students Robert's work on power. And in fact, there's so much there about the interrelationships of power and participation. You were all Chamberites, so I don't have to recite each of them, but let me just name 6 ideas and then come to their relevance today. The power of method. Long before Joseph Nye was writing about soft power, the power of knowledge, the power of ideas, Robert was writing about the power of knowledge and the importance of people, the powerless, being able to produce their own knowledge. The power of uppers. Not only does Robert's theory of change believe that change will come from below, but uppers also have to learn to listen, to reverse, to analyze their own attitudes and behaviors. The power of scale, moving from the personal to the institutional. When I came to IDS, my first workshop in 1996 was the workshop where we talked about taking participation to scale. Many of you in this room will remember the difficult debates we had about whether or not to engage with the World Bank when we really tried to take these ideas to scale in the now famous Voices of the Poor project. And that led Robert also to begin to write much more after that time, I believe, about the power of power. The power of the rich and the wealthy and large-scale institutions. We may remember that Robert argued very hard that there should be a chapter 12 of the World Development Report. He said it should not be about poverty, but about wealth, not about the poor and powerless, but about their transformation, but about the rich and powerful, not about the poor and powerless and their transformation, but about the rich and powerful and theirs. When that recommendation was ignored, he wrote again saying the failure of critiquing large institutions and their failure to be reflective. By calling Christmas vegetarian, the powerful turkeys survive. The webs of powerlessness. In a development time when we tend to focus on one issue and one sector and one result, Robert's work reminds us not only that poverty is multidimensional, but powerlessness is multidimensional. And the challenge of dealing with power is to enable poor people to gain development is good change. Agency and power of poor people are the key to development. And finally, the power to empower. If that's our theory of change, Roberts converts the idea of the notion of power over, which we've oftentimes used, which I was oftentimes wrote about, to say that power over also brings the power to empower. By becoming aware of their own power, the powerful can open up spaces for those who are poor and excluded to act and claim their rights, e.g. to realize their agency. So we've been asked to reflect forward, to think a little bit about what these ideas mean for today. And I found this really difficult because I think the ideas continue to endure. And the best way we can reflect forward, is trying to put them back on the agenda once again. While Robert's messages on the links between power and participation are as relevant as ever, my fear is that they are increasingly disappearing from the development landscape, transfixed not with changing power, but with getting quick results, delivered from above, and measured in a way that skates over questions of power and relationships. Robert, I think you need to write about another form of power. I was going to say something about your age, but I won't. The power to forget, the power of amnesia, the power of institutional amnesia to fail to learn and to continue to ignore. The messages do endure, and they require us to return once again to first principles. Not only whose reality counts, but whose results count, and who counts those results. How do uppers change? How do institutions change? In a time of ever-increasing inequality, how do we reverse the telescope and focus on the rich and the powerful? How do we understand the multidimensionality of powerlessness, not only its symptoms? And how do we develop the power of development agencies and institutions like us in this room to empower others and not just ourselves? This quote from Robert I found most poignant. Power is almost in food, yet power is everywhere. Considering development without power and relationship is like analyzing irrigation without considering water and its distribution. It's time once again to stop counting the irrigation ditches and pay attention to the nature of the water in which they flow.